Hello, and welcome to part two of putting ourselves in their shoes. And for part two, we're going to look specifically at putting ourselves in their shoes in Dickinson ISD, tips for working with students on the autism spectrum. My name is Maddie Meier, and I am a licensed specialist in school psychology here in Dickinson ISD. I had the privilege and joy of being a student of Dr. Straight's during my graduate program, and so she asked me to team up with her on this presentation to really look at just in general how we can be helping our students in the classroom, and then specifically in Dickinson ISD, what resources and support do we have to help you in the classroom and working with these students. So I think that Dr. Straight in the first part of this presentation did an amazing job of reframing what we may think of autism. And I know at the end of that first part of the presentation, she asked you, now, without knowing any tips and tricks, any interventions specifically, how does just reframing this perspective of who is a person with autism, who is autistic, how does that help you maybe reframe how you might interact with them? And maybe not at all, maybe a lot. But we are going to give you some tips and tricks to help you in the classroom as you're interacting with students with autism, because it is a spectrum, or as Dr. Straight said, a pie. And while some of our kiddos may be in like our sales classroom, our self-contained classrooms, or maybe WAVE or even TIDES, on the other hand, there's kiddos, autistic students that are in our general education classrooms, or maybe in a RISE or an inclusion support classroom. So we really want to make sure that we are prepared and ready to help these students in whatever way they come. So I'm going to break it down into the three different areas that Dr. Straight did as well. So this first area is social. And when we're looking at creating social opportunities for these kids, we really want to look at creating opportunities for them to work with partners or in groups. Like you saw in that last video, he really needed somebody else to come up to him to help him with friendships. He wanted to be that invisible man and step back and not really worried about it because he didn't want to get punched in the stomach, but didn't understand how. And so for a lot of our autistic students, they maybe are wanting friendships, but just don't know how to go about that. So creating opportunities for them to work in partners or groups and kind of, you know, your class the best. So you know which students would be best for them to work with to really help flourish and maybe practice those social interaction skills. Another little tip and trick is that you really want to be direct in your instruction. Don't leave anything up to them to interpret or think that they might, you assume they knew, because they probably won't, or they might not. And so if you want them to do A, B, C, make sure you don't just do A, C, because you assume they'll know B. Has to go in between. Because if you only said A and C, they might not do B. So be really direct in our instruction. And then afterwards, we want to be checking to make sure they understand what you said. If they look confused or they're not getting started on their work, it may not be that they're refusing to do their work. It may be that they don't understand what you just asked them, and they don't know how to get that information from you. Another thing that might be helpful is to explain the whys, right? So you may have a student that is stuck in one way of thinking, and you provide them with a different way of doing that, and explaining why you have asked them to do things in that way will be really helpful, because that's what they like. And I shouldn't say that's generalizing, but you may have students where that is helpful for them to explain the whys of certain situations. Or it could be simply, why can't I sit by this student? And it could be because you learn better here, or because that student needs to be over there, kind of just explaining those. The last and really probably most important is to look out for bullying. As you saw previously in the previous presentation, these students, because we're not always picking up on certain things, is we can be really can come across as naive or just unaware of people that are bullying them or trying to hurt them or make fun of them for the way they are processing their environment. The next area is that restricted interest and repetitive behaviors. And both of these, when these feel dysregulated to an autistic person, that's when it kind of can lead to those emotional responses that we'll get. So all of these will help with those emotional responses as well. But for restricted interest and repetitive behaviors, first thing, we want to prepare for change in routine when able. A lot of times that routine is a sense of security and a sense of, I know what is happening, because so much of their environment is, I'm not understanding and I'm not processing my environment like everybody else seems to be able to. So, but I know the routine. So that's something I know. So when that changes, that can be very uncomfortable and very unsettling for our autistic students. So if you know, I'm going to have a sub tomorrow, and we can't prepare for everything, but when we can, letting these students know, or if there is going to be a change, say you didn't know you had to call in sick. Let's make sure somebody that they know is telling them, hey, our teacher came in sick. Again, explaining the whys. You don't have to go into detail. It could just be they can't come in today. And having a person that they recognize and that they have rapport with, explaining that to them rather than the sub coming in. Sub comes in, this kiddo is distressed now because their regular teacher is not here, and that teacher doesn't know them either. So having someone that they know explain those changes, and when it can be, prepare them as much as possible. Another area is that maybe restricted interest or fixation on a topic or a subject. So designate a share time. It doesn't have to be a show and tell, but it could be a share time. And it doesn't have to be just for that student. You can ask all students in the class, on Friday, we're going to have a share time, pick a subject that you like. And this allows other kids to learn about different interests of their peers and maybe find out, oh, that peer is similar to me. So during those share times, if you see that there's similar interests between individuals, kind of partner them up or be like, hey, why don't y'all talk about this more? You may need to put kind of a timer on that share time to designate, okay, you have 5 minutes to talk about your topic, and then we're going to move on to the next student. But you want to allow them to develop and share those interests with others appropriately. The next area is allow for non-distracting fidgeting or stemming, as you might call it. So that could be the flapping or just even as simple as the rocking, but it could just be fidgeting here. It could be I'm tapping my pen. So if these are in a non-distracting, also not self-injurious ways, we don't want to have a student that's banging their head and hurting themselves. But if they're rocking in class and not distracting people, you'll see lower down, I have preferential seating. Well, maybe that preferential seating isn't necessarily closest to the teacher, but maybe it's, here, so that they're able to rock without distracting other students. And then that way also be able to self-soothe themselves. Also, if it is something that is distracting, either putting a timer or like a pen, tapping, that might get loud. You can put like a piece of felt or something underneath it, or on the tip of the pen or pencil to help with that. There's some other where it's not distracting to others, but it's helping them focus and be doing well in the classroom. Another thing is visual cues, checklists to help them organize their materials. Again, like I was talking, that ABC, maybe they need a checklist of this is what I do first, then I do this, then I do this, or a checklist of what I need to bring home at the end of the day. Visual cues. Did you check your backpack? Did you look in your folder? Things like that. And that's not just helpful for kiddos with autism, but all students could benefit from that, especially those visually rich classroom environments. You also want to be aware of their sensory sensitivities, especially for these kiddos. Like, just ask them if you see that they might, maybe it's in a science lab and you see they are not touching any of the sand or something like that, that they're supposed to be digging through to find something. it might be, it's not that they're refusing or trying to be defiant. It's that this sensory overload is too much for them. It could be also where they need in the cafeteria to wear headphones, some noise canceling headphones. And just being willing to ask them, like, how would this help you? Would this help you more? A lot of these, especially for some of our students that are already identified with autism, these things might be on on their IEP, on their accommodations list. But for some students that may not be identified yet, these aren't on there. And we'll kind of go into those if you already are thinking, I have a student, they're not in SPED. And it doesn't mean they need SPED, but you're like, oh gosh, what I'll do, I'll get into that in a little bit. And I kind of talked about that preferential seating, just making where they're sitting best for that student. Maybe that is in the front so that you can kind of have that proximity control with them when you're teaching. Or maybe it is, like I said, maybe towards the back, making sure they're not by a certain student for any reason. Just being aware of where that would be where that student would thrive best in the classroom. And then again, that last area is that emotional responses. Like Dr. Straight was saying, it's that kind of overload of sensations that can maybe cause a shutdown or a breakdown. Or it could just be that we are having an anxious day. So you want to allow for breaks, especially like I put on there, keep an eye out for those increased self-soothing behaviors. If your student is usually rubbing their hands and it's not, but all of a sudden you start talking about the test that's coming up on Friday and all of this homework that's coming due, and all of a sudden they're going faster or louder, or it looks more intense than maybe the regular day-to-day, check in with that student. In general, you want to be checking in with those students as well, just to make sure, like I said, it's you're checking for understanding. You'll kind of notice all of these kind of go all together and help with one another. One tip or trick isn't just helping one area, but really it's helping everything just help regulate themselves. And that's the biggest thing. Autistic people are in an environment where they are not able to process and that everything all the time. And that can cause a lot of dysregulation. And so anything to help them regulate and then will help with that emotional response piece. So these are kind of what you can do in the classroom, day to day, students where you're like, yep, that will help them. And I think that they just need some opportunities to work with peers more, and that will help. But what if we're like, no, they need more interaction. They're really not understanding, and it's kind of beyond what you can do in the classroom day to day. So here in Dickinson ISD, like we have programs and people in place to help then. So one of them is your general education counselors. While they might it might not be a specific like autism group, they could have a group maybe of girls, small group counseling that maybe could happen. The general ed counselors can help with social stories, and that's also our behavior coaches. Our behavior coaches are not just for our SPED kiddos. They can help across the board. So especially that level 2 support, when we look at the behavior coaching continuum that we have in Dickinson ISD, our behavior coaches can come in at even that level 1, those gen ed students, and our level 2, where maybe they just need some support in the classroom, is like if you're needing ideas, or maybe they do need a small group social skills group with other individuals. And then also you have your LSSPs on your campuses. Well, we don't have offices on our campus. You do have an LSSP that is kind of assigned your campus. So if you don't know who that is, please either reach out to me or to Maggie Burke, who's the coordinator for assessment and related services, and we can get you contact with who your LSSP is on your campus. Your admin should know who your LSSP is as well, and they can just really help with more specific interventions or ideas, because if you figure it out, and probably I've heard before, meeting one person with autism is meeting one person with autism. It really is that spectrum or that pie where there's different strengths and differences for each individual, and where one thing might help or work for one student might not always help for another. So if you are needing some more direct or more specific interventions, you definitely want to be reaching out to either your gen ed counselors, behavior coaches, and then your LSSPs. And like I said before, if you have listened to this first training and this second training, and you are now like, I think I have a student that has autism, but they're not in SPED, or nobody has said they have autism. If you're suspecting that, even a hint of that, please reach out to your campus LSSP to talk about it, to see if this is maybe a student that needs to get referred for a special education evaluation. And that's something that can definitely happen. Whether or not they need SPED is if they need that differential instruction, but sometimes having just that knowledge and understanding of who they are can also be helpful too. So I encourage you to reach out to these people. I encourage you to start kind of seeing how just changing your mind frame and changing your perspective helps you interact differently with not just your kids with autism, but with all of your students, and really looking at these strengths and these differences in learning rather than deficits in learning, because we all need a little help in places, and some more than others and some in different areas than others. But what we want to do is making sure we are doing what's best for these students and that they are being successful in the educational environment.